Let's talk triad pairs, Coltrane changes, altered pentatonics, substitutions including the tritone, and more in these burn-in dominant chord phrases. Now, on dominant chords, it really opens up and gives us the freedom to explore these melodic choices, which really can stem from harmonic chord substitutions. Now, in the first example here, I utilized some Coltrane changes, and really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the Coltrane changes. We're simply just going to go up a minor third from our G7 for B-flat instruments, so that's going to give me a B-flat 7. Now, I take it a slight step further in the fact that I actually utilize the same shape and go down a whole step to A-flat 7. So basically what we have is outlining that triad of the substitution, in this case B-flat 7, and then down a half step for A-flat 7. So what we get is... Now when we're playing this at tempo, it really does give us that tension that we're looking for when we're putting in a substitution. So in context, it might sound... There's a lot going on there in just those couple of beats. Now remember the power of sequences. Now this is just a short example of what a sequence could be, but I could simply just keep taking that down whole steps and create a longer sequence. That is a super powerful way to engage not only the rhythm section, but the listener, because it gives us something accessible that we can grab onto. Even though we're changing keys, because the shape, and especially the triad, is such a strong structure, it is going to carry us through that tension. Now, as we continue through the example, I do a simple bebop scale descending into my next device that I explore, which is the tritone substitution. Now, the reason the tritone substitution is often utilized is because we keep the same thirds and sevenths as our root chord. So in this case, G7, our thirds and sevenths are B and F. And if we do the tritone, remember just the sharp 4 away is going to be D-flat 7. And the third of D-flat 7 is F. And the seventh is C-flat or B natural. So again, the same thirds and sevenths. Now, when I step outside the key, I often want to really emphasize the notes that make it unique to that key. So often I will actually just arpeggiate, because that's enough tension to keep our interest and to show that we're going to a different key. If we add a whole bunch of chromaticism and try to be in a different key, it just gets very ambiguous. So right here, I just simply go up that arpeggio. So from the beginning of that measure, okay, now to round out the rest of this phrase, now I could simply just think about a dominant chord. If I raise that 4 and I raise that 5, I get what we call Lydian augmented. Remember, Lydian is the raised 4, augmented is the raised 5. Now this gives us kind of this whole tony shape and sound. Now again, these are phrases that utilize so many different elements and devices. It doesn't mean that you have to constantly be exploring all of these in all of your lines. Now I find the more devices that I have available, the more options I have, the more I can decide to do something or not to do something. In example 1, we're utilizing a couple of different devices. Remember, we're using some substitutions in the form of the tritone sub and Coltrane substitution. And we're also doing a bit of a sequence in the very beginning of that example. Let's check out example number 2. Okay, a whole nother frontier is the altered pentatonic. Now, an altered pentatonic is basically a pentatonic scale in which we're using some sort of alteration, or what we would deem an alteration. Now remember, alteration really kind of refers to what we do on dominant chord. So that's going to be our flat 9, sharp 9, sharp 11, flat 13. Now, if we alter a sort of standard pentatonic, that falls into the altered pentatonic category by my definition. So if we look at example number 2, the first altered pentatonic really kind of stems from the dominant pentatonic. And the dominant pentatonic would be 1, 2, 3, 5, flat 7. Now, a lot of these different pentatonic scales can start on different notes, so they essentially could have different labels, but I tried to find what would be the most common, accessible note to start on to define that pentatonic. In this case, I decided the dominant pentatonic. So if I simply play just the dominant pentatonic, I get this. Okay, so that's kind of where I'm coming from with this pentatonic. Now notice that E flat in this case over G7 is the flat 13. So I'm already kind of getting outside of the key. But again, remember that when you have a really strong structure like a pentatonic or a triad, you can get outside the key and have some sort of accessibility to it. It kind of helps keep you grounded and create melodies. Now I'm going to alter that pentatonic. Remember 1, 2, 3, 5, flat 7 for a dominant pentatonic scale, and I'm going to alter that by raising the 5th, giving me a B natural, so I get this. Okay, we get kind of this whole tony sound in there as well. Now the last part there, I go into a different altered pentatonic. Now remember, with the pentatonic scale, it offers us a lot of different inversions and things that we can create, different shapes in different melodic cells. Now I encourage you to explore those things, and we can cover that in a different video. So from here, it's very similar in the fact that I chose another kind of dominant pentatonic to alter. Now in this case, a dominant pentatonic starting on G would be G, A, B, D, F natural. But instead of an A, I decided to use a B natural to really define the sound of the chord, and then I raised the 11th. So our regular dominant pentatonic would sound like this. Now remember, a pentatonic is any 5-note scale, so it's pretty broad when it comes to that, so there's many choices. So in this case, instead of the A, I'm using a B natural, and I'm adding a C sharp in there, so what I get is this. It's really what I would call a Lydian dominant pentatonic, and when I put it in this shape that I've got written here, notice I actually utilize sort of a sequence there in order to draw you into that shape. Let's look at example number 3. Now, example 3 is all about triad pairs. Now, remember, triad pairs typically kind of occur about a whole step apart and often share the same chord quality, but it doesn't always have to be that way. You could have triad pairs of tritone apart. You could have triad pairs that mix and match chord qualities. I begin with triad pairs based off of the root and based off of the flat 7. So in this case, we've got a G major triad and an F major triad. Now I quickly change and start to bring in some more altered sounds, and that's what I love about augmented triads, because right off the bat, depending on what note I'm starting on, I've already got something built in there that's going to bring me a little bit outside of the key and create some melodic tension. Now in this case, I build my triad pairs off of the flat 13, or E flat in this case, and I use an augmented triad, which is going to give me E flat, G, and B natural. Now, that's going to give me the root and the third, so very grounded in the harmony, and then, of course, the flat 13. The other triad pair that I use is my F augmented triad, and in this case, that's going to give me F, A, C sharp, which is our flat 7, 9, and our 11, our sharp 11. Now I just create a shape, something that is going to be a little bit less predictable in some ways, or a little more interesting. And in this case, I come up with this shape. It's really basically 2 or 3 shapes that I kind of string together. Now remember, again, the Triad is such a powerful device that you can really go outside of the key and still make it seem accessible or have some sort of structure. So as we move through this example, I utilize another different triad. In this case, it's going to be from our sharp 11 from the root, which is our tritone sub D flat major triad. And then I couple that with our E flat triad, so I get this. So right there, you've got our D flat major triad and the E flat augmented triad I bring back, and you'll notice that it's a real stark contrast when I go back inside the key. All right, example number 4 utilizes a couple of different things. I've got, again, some triad pairs. I've got some bebop scale passing type of passages, and I've also got some half-step approaches. Let's check it out. Okay, we start off with some passing tones into the bebop scale and then right into our augmented triads. Again, I'm using our F augmented and E flat augmented. So that little passage there sounds like this. I bring back some passing notes there that chromatically lead me in to the root of the chord, the G, and then I decide, okay, let me get another solid structure that goes outside of the key. And in this case, I really want to highlight that sharp 11, so I just simply go up what I call maybe a Lydian arpeggio. Now that gives me this really kind of open sound, and again, because it's a kind of a solid shape, it's going to draw in the listener, it's going to draw in the rhythm section, and make it more accessible, and probably create some energy and a response from the rhythm section. Now I find an opportunity to do a bit of a sidestep. Now when I sidestep, I typically do a chromatic sidestep, and I like to actually go up more than down. It's just something that it sounds a little bit better to me. So in this case, I go up a half step and I go to our A flat from our G. Now you could think of this as notes from the altered scale, because it is, but at the same time, I really want to think about the structure of that A flat because it gives me a certain shape, whereas if I'm thinking about the altered scale, I might play more of a scale shape. That's a really important concept to think about. When you think about harmonic substitution and actually really outlining that harmony, we often pick chord tones, which might come in the form of an arpeggio, whereas if we think some sort of scale that we're going to borrow or imply or play, we often think more stepwise motion. Now, it's not always the case, but I certainly find in my own playing that if I kind of think about and give myself different cues, I approach it differently. All right, throughout these examples, we covered a lot of territory. Coltrane changes, altered pentatonics, triad pairs, some chord substitutions, including the tritone substitution, and sidestepping or sequences. I encourage you to take these concepts because remember, this is what it's all about, the concept and application, not just simply learning the lines, because each one of these you could really spend a lifetime on. I tried to put them all within some of these phrases to kind of be an introduction on some of the options that you have, but really try and take each one of these and get really inside them. Happy practicing.